I figure that probably some of you know who Jason Shurka is. He's an old Wall Street guy. And I just watched a little part of a presentation that he had with somebody else. I guess it was on TikTok on my Facebook page. And he was talking about how did they get millions and millions of people all over the planet to get addicted to cigarettes. And he was talking about a Harvard study because you remember what an inverter is. It needs a primal source, sound, and light field in order to pull on a spiral. It is a natural crystal spiral because they're fallen states of consciousness. And when they fall and they're experiencing lower density and they can't repair their DNA, which is to repair the codes to run the original template, so they experience an eternal sun, which is an eternal spirit, which is pure, eternal, absolute love, which is eternal spirit of fire, which means they're purified. Okay, so I start with that. So he talked about profile. So you know what a profile is, right? So you realize that what an echo map is, which is a fire map, but the relationship that organic water has, protoplasm, with fire. And there's a 300-to-1 relationship between the molecular covalent bonds of elements, the elemental circuitry. So we all know what the chemistry is, the bioneural chemistry, and the ATP Krebs cycle of your immunity function, which is your shield, which is the purity of your consciousness, which is the strength of your consciousness field to protect your sun temple. So you're running hot. So you're burning up anything that is represented by codes as a result of what we're experiencing, running full activation, which is full sensory perception, which means you have God seed perception, which means I know what I am and I know what I'm not. So you're experiencing any codes that are being introduced into the field, which is the morphogenetic field structure of conscious communication between atoms. Atoms that communicate to other atoms. Cells that communicate to other cells. Now we're back to the organization of cells, which is the organization of libraries, which is the organization of what? Cellular organization. The way that cells communicate to other cells. So other cells are communicating with other cells. This is what's going on. So when you're experiencing being one with all creation, you're getting all the information from all the other cells that are letting you know this is what's going on through your sensors. So you're running full sensory, which is a full capacitor, which is an eternal battery, which is self-generating. So you're a self-generating power plant, right? So you're experiencing the higher state of awareness because we're experiencing the first sun, the first state of awareness, the first field. The echo, the first echo. The still point, which is the innocence of the first flame, which is doing no harm. Yeah. So we talked about profiles. So you know what a data profile is, right? So they glean the data. So they can introduce all this stuff into the morphogenetic field structure, and then they map the data. And so what is the data informing them of? The reaction state of what we're experiencing as a result of what we call burn time, which is an echo map. Now we're into versions of Blade Runners, versions of cyborgs, versions of androids, and versions of biotech based on the fire codes, which are the mapping codes, which are the mapping systems of mapping planetary grids, galactic grids, universal grids, and water tables, which is a schedule, which is a fire schedule, which is the speed at which circuits are opening and closing, which is our tempo, which is our breathing tempo. So we run divine right mathematical order, which is divine right timing to experience 0 degrees. Exact center point of balance with the first star. So there's no separation between Sophia, the God force field, and what we experience in us because we serve the one, the house of one. The first circle, the first spin, the first fire code. The know me code. Know my code. So they target, and I mentioned this many times before, they target the endocrine system, the biochemical hormones, the glands, right? So they go to great length to study how human angelics, if you will, or how units of consciousness that are connected with each other as a formation react. Oh, so we're talking about the reaction states between cold and hot. When hot and cold are joined as one, when silver and gold are joined as one, you're experiencing being one equal unto all the other ones, which is equal unto all the other living cells that are communicating with each other. So now we're back to base platforms, building the first platform, an eternal platform as an eternal template, as an eternal sun, the one we're always with. So these are your Dr. Frankensteins, your mad scientists, because they're mad. That's called a mental field, which is a psycho field. So you know what a psychopath is? See, their perception of power is through the accumulation of more electrical power instead of being a gifter, an eternal gifter of electrons. So in order to build what they build, they need our power because we experience an eternal power plant, gifting electrons at the highest rate of speed, and why we need a voltage regulator. So they refuse to serve. And since they refuse to serve, what happens? They keep compressing their ions, which is their consciousness, to experience implosion and go nova through the use of self-destructive technologies. By virtue of what they do to others, they experience in their own solar-coded records. So their own solar-coded records is a reflection of who they are, of what they do to themselves by what they do to others. Because they can't let go of that cell. They can't let go of those spirits. They can't let go of those units of energy because they are the source of power from which Frankensteins operate. Their operating systems, their design, death science designs in order to generate another artificial number. So it's a numbers game, which is an AI war gamer. So they play games. They play games with the mind of God, the creative engine of first creation, the eternal sun, the eternal spirit of pure absolute love that's on fire to create, which is synonymous with on fire to learn. So that we're learning through the first central sun, to experience being one with the first spirit, the eternal spirit of fire, which is what purifies us, strengthens our field, and strengthens our shield, which is the normal planet shield code. So we run the first code, the first Nomi code, know my code. Know the first central code, the first spin code, the spirit in the molecule. So we don't experience molecular compaction to experience being solid. Noble gases, noble elements, the ether, echoes in the rain. So yeah, they're devious, right? And deceptive. And that's why it's the invisible landscape, because it has zero to do with what you look like. And that's why it's a mapping, reconnaissance, mapping the field, is mapping the circuits, which is the nature of those circuits, which is a circuit design, which is a dead spirit design, which is a death science design, which is a fallen system. So it's an illusion because it doesn't exist without us. That's why we're here as rescue missions, which is salvage, which is redemption, which is recovery, which is reclamation. So we all know what the reclamation center is. I'm reclaiming myself to experience what I used to remember being what it is that I am in spirit form and flow, which is what love is. It goes on forever. Gifting love energy, which is love and service to others. Hey, now you're a server. Now you're not an inverter. So they need a source of energy to build their systems. And we're experiencing the systems that they design, which are fallen spiritual systems, which is a fallen spiritual state of consciousness that cannot recover itself. It refuses to surrender to itself, to experience being one. Now it's a gifter of electrons because it's experiencing the first sun, the first biovoltage line of communication, which is zero. So polarity doesn't exist. Now it does. Pause. Pause the player. Pause the breath. Take a breath. The first breath of Kamaloti, the innocence of an eternal flame that's always on. So that light is always on, so we're always awake. I know, Mama. And so it's not funny. But it's rather remarkable that this information is even being brought out, but it's true. It has everything to do with the endocrine system, which is endocrine disruptors, which has everything to do with what? Separation anxiety. Experiencing anxiety. The signals, the neurons, the bioneural network. Now we're experiencing what they experience as a result of what they do, that they experience, which is their recording, which is their records, what they're responsible for what they do, because they're units of energy that represent a formation, because they're a network. So they communicate through their network what it is that they do next by virtue of who they are. So now we experience who they are, which isn't what love is. Now you know the difference between knowing one from the other, the first son, eternal spirit of fire. So yeah, it has everything to do with mapping. Mapping codes, mapping systems, mapping morphogenetic field structures. The reaction state. Now they got the data. Right? Scanning the field, scanning the data field. What is the data informing them of? Now they can use that data. And they use that data in order to control future memories. Just like Goering said one time, wringing his hands. Oh, if they only knew what we know how to do. So it has everything to do with full activation, full sensory power, experiencing being one with the first son. And how that relates to future memories. Particularly when you're the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Experiencing being one with the first one. Which is the highest state of awareness, which is pure, eternal, absolute love. So that means we know who we are. We know the one we serve. We serve forever on behalf of the first one. But we're not behalf. Cutting the distance in half. Remember, Patty? Cutting the distance in half. Cutting the distance, which is the circulation speed. Fall in a hole. We don't live in holes. Right? So that's why it's all coming full circle. The first circle of fire. The bands. The circles. The God seed ruche. Gated wise. 3 lines. The first sun. The first fire code. Fire and water, fire and ice. Thank you, Jason Shurka, for providing that data on cigarettes. See, I mean, imagine how much that's what they do. It's a sick mental field, which means they get rich. They need all these electrons. And then that becomes their source of power, right? To build war machines. Because they need time to build them, don't they? So then we experience in the future what the model set looks like, what the train set looks like. The Truman Show. So you see what they build breaks. That's why all your automobiles how much changes have actually taken place on a visual mathematical way. If you go back to the first automobile, I guess it was Ford. I remember Patty mentioned one time in 1864, some engineer for the Ford Motor Company built an automobile, I think, that ran on water. Right? And so you went from that to what we see today, running on AI boxes, right? The codes, the circuits, the avionics, the audio-visual ions, the elementals that are running all the circuits. And so you don't see a lot of time changes over time. But one thing that I learned through Napa Auto Parts, they actually make more money off our ATP Krebs cycle by building junk. So that's why they build junk. Because they realize they make more money from selling brand new cars by selling you new parts. Other vendors that make used parts, or they make new parts, right, where they have a license and they get a permit to make those parts for the original manufacturer of that automobile, and that's where they make all their money. So they realize that, hey, we make a fortune off of building things that break. So we can experience in the future more money that we get out of these people, out of their ATP Krebs cycle, which is their biometric account, which is their solar bond that we're holding in trust. In God we trust. The birth certificate. That's the reaction that this phone has whenever I communicate that. So you know what it is, which isn't what we are. The miasma field, the shadow body network. So that's why everything that I call it the AI sales force, right? They're always selling us something, right? It's just like, and this is one of the things that I've mapped over time, is that they're building more things now that they sell to us that break at a faster pace. In other words, I might have had a phone 20 years ago and it lasted longer than one does now, which means they're charging you more for their technology, but their technology is breaking down faster, that you've got to buy a new model that they're producing as a result of the electrons that they suck out of us. Future proofs past, Back to the Future, future memories. That's why and that's why you see people sometimes driving around in cars that are in the 1950s. Because one, they were easy to work on. Just like I had a Toyota 4x4, I think, what year was that, Mama? 1988? Actually, I had one model that all I ever did in terms of having to put money back into the machine was change the oil every 3,000 miles, make sure the timing belt on it was fine, right? Make sure I had an air filter that I changed the air filter on it routinely and made sure that the water in the radiator was flushed. That's minimum maintenance. And I had, how many miles? 2 million miles. I got 2 million miles out of a Toyota. Believe it or not. I finally had to rebuild it. I rebuilt the top part of it. And it didn't cost that much to have that done. Matter of fact, I had a great friend of mine that was able to pull a motor, a 22RE motor out of a Toyota. He, by the way, went to work for one of these NASCAR guys. Not Dale Earnhardt, that other big racer. The Miller guy that had the black and the gold car. I can't remember his name. He became a the stock car folks that race stock cars. He went to go work for them. But he pulled a 22RE motor that I ended up, the vehicle itself froze up and the arms on it just froze up. And so it needed to rebuild. He pulled the motor out of that and rebuilt it, mic'd it and rebuilt it and put the engine back in there in 45 minutes. Okay, it didn't charge me anything to do it, other than for the parts that came out of the shop that he was working with. But we did that. We did actually sort of did it together. But you see how speed and timing factors work with that. He was a remarkable mechanic. like a structural mechanic, like a morphogenetic field structure mechanic. The speed in which he can rebuild something that breaks. His dad also worked for Rockwell International Space Transportation Group in Downey. The connections that we meet. Bless your heart, Randy Gould. That was his name. He was a kind, compassionate, and generous person. He was probably one of my best friends that I knew throughout my whole life. Because of that, the folks that we choose to have relationships with that live in love and service to others, which means they're not seeking money out of you in order to help you. They're more than happy to provide all their free energy and free time to help you. So you're not having to spend money out of your pocket to fix something, like a used car salesman, they used to say. Anyway, have a beautiful day. We love you all. Thank you, Jason Shurka, for revealing that information.